right, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our first webinar introducing Alpha Hub, as well as bringing in additional interest to private capital markets as a whole. My name is Trevor Beecham. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you from investors, wealth advisors, founders, and partners joining us from all around the world. Today's webinar, we want it to be more than just about launching a single product or talking about a single service. We want to talk more about opening the doors of private capital to as many diverse audiences as possible in an industry long known for being very exclusive and very closed doors. And so we want to make sure that we replace those barriers with access, transparency, and connection. Here at Alpha, that's really what we're trying to do at our core. And so for decades, private markets have really been powerful but limited. And great ideas often struggle to reach the capital that it needs. Entrepreneurs that are looking for funding, think of Shark Tank, take a lot of effort, and it's very tiresome to actually reach the investors that they need to. At Alpha Hub, we're trying to build that digital infrastructure to make private investing as intuitive and interconnected as the public markets as possible, while keeping it with its unique advantages for investors and that unique amount of returns that we're really trying to drive. We are an AI-driven platform that intelligently matches those investors and companies and takes the hard work out of it for you by matching you to the appropriate investor according to what your portfolio is and according to what your clients' portfolios are. We provide the groundwork for that future liquidity as well through our distributed ledger technology and blockchain. Again, our goal isn't just efficiency, it's inclusion. So we want to create a system where a startup in Austin can be discovered by a family office in New York and anywhere from LA to Singapore. So we also want to make an environment where an advisor can help clients participate very confidently in these opportunities once reserved for very institutional circles. So I don't want to leave too much and I don't want to speak too much on the platform because I know that our founder will have much more to say on this subject. And I also don't want to speak too much and take up too much time from our distinguished panelists in the field who will very much be able to talk more about improving access to these private capital markets as a whole. Before we get started and before we get our little intro video going, I'd like to just very briefly go over some features that we'd like to help you with over the course of our webinar. You'll notice that we do have a Q&A function. That is where we'd like you to drop the questions for us. If it's more general about private capital markets, about our platform, or about anything really, I or one of our team will do our best to answer that question. If it's something that would rather be directly addressed to one of our panelists based on what they're speaking about, we'll go ahead and upvote it and pin it and keep it for the last portion of our webinar, where we'll address it directly and have the panelists answer your question more completely. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and keep all of our mics muted unless we are panelists. And if you do have anything further, please do put it in the Q&A and we'll be sure to address it. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductory video. Please enjoy. and then we'll pass it off to Nico to get our webinar started.
Trevor, thank you so much for introducing me and also opening up for our first ever webinar with Alpha Hub. I'm Nico Carroll, Head of Business Development here at Alpha Hub, and I'll be your moderator today. At Alpha Hub, our mission is simple: to redefine how private capital connects, bringing together founders, investors, and institutions through technology, inclusion, and intelligence. We're building pathways that make private markets smarter, faster, and more inclusive for all. Today's conversation is about bridging the gap between founders who are building great ideas and investors who are looking for meaningful opportunities. We're joined by an incredible lineup of leaders who are shaping the future of access, inclusion, and innovation in private markets. Let me start by introducing our distinguished panelists. We have Nelly Vasquez-Roland, entrepreneur and founder of Goals. She has a strong background in investment banking and social entrepreneurship and real estate entrepreneurship. We have Christian Nwasike, managing partner of Practice Management Consultants and founder of the Wealth Equity Certified Advisor Institute, that brings and also brings a wealth of experience from the wealth management sector as well as financial inclusion. And then last but not least, we have Walter Gomez, the founder and CEO of Alpha Hub and Konzortia Capital, whose vision for AI-driven private capital is reshaping how investors and founders connect globally. Together, our speakers bring perspectives from wealth management, private equity, commercial real estate, and technology, making this a well-rounded discussion on how to democratize access to private capital. We're here to explore one central theme: how do we open doors for diverse founders and create sustainable ecosystems in private markets? Let's go ahead and dive into this discussion. And Mr. Nwasike, what are the biggest challenges diverse founders face when accessing private capital, and how can we close those gaps?
Technology, right? Thank you for highlighting that. I was actually just saying thanks for hosting me and inviting me into this amazing discussion on access to private capital by diverse founders. I mean, that's an amazing question that you just asked. And studies have shown that, all women founding teams and teams with disabled individuals, teams with Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American founders receive a tiny fraction of the total, I would say, venture capital or private capital pie in the marketplace, today. And there are five, I would say, biggest challenges. There are five amazing challenges that a lot of diverse founders encounter, and I wanted to summarize them into five different categories. But I'll try to have a discussion with them, and you can follow up with questions as we think about this topic. But I would say one of the first things that came to mind in conversations with diverse founders here in the Chicagoland area and across the globe is the implicit bias that challenges investment decisions. Diverse founders often face this implicit and sometimes explicit bias from investors. And these diverse founders, include women, founders of color, and other unrepresented groups, right? And that implicit bias hinders the flow of capital into some amazing projects that could get started here domestically and on the global market as well. The next opportunity that I want to talk about is the limited access to warm and social networks. Now, in the venture private capital space, we know that a lot of funding decisions, not all of them, but a lot of funding decisions come from I would say, warm introductions, right, from trusted sources. And many diverse founders fall outside of these established homogeneous networks of many investors, right? And so when you don't have access to a network, it also impacts or hinders your ability to raise capital for projects. There's lack of diversity among investors and decision makers, disparities in valuation and funding momentum, and there's in my opinion, the fifth idea I came up with is the unfair due diligence standards and financial barometers that are placed on diverse founders as compared to I would say non-diverse founders. But I think that if you were to really look at the entire landscape, these are some of the top five challenges diverse founders face when trying to access private capital to expand operations.
No, and that's excellent. Thank you, Mr. Wasike, for breaking that down. And you mentioned being in the Chicagoland area. We also have another native Chicago presenter on, Miss Nellie. Based on what Mr. Wasike is sharing as far as having access to private capital and some of the biases that come along being a diverse founder or entrepreneur, what are some of the roadblocks that you have faced and some ways that you've also overcame?
Hi, Nacho. I also want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this incredible discussion. I'm so excited to see so many diverse founders here that are speakers, and looking forward to get to know them better throughout this conversation. Some of the challenges, I think, obviously, being a woman of color and starting out my career right out of college in the world of finance at a time there really wasn't anybody like me in this space. It would have been easy for me to come up with a lot of excuses as to why, I could not be successful. And I almost gave up. I even thought about changing my name, if it made it easier. Nellie, with a more mainstream name might have been a lot easier in life. But, I realized that, I actually needed to look at myself and figure out how I could use my background, my name, and my personal experience to my advantage, and I found that until I got to that point and realizing that, what many might see as a disadvantage, I was able to pivot and turn into an advantage, is when my life started to change. I didn't grow up with the golden Rolodex, like many of my colleagues, in the field that were, expected, to work in the world of finance, and their parents had, vast, networks. I didn't. And I felt that what was the most important thing that I needed to do was to not only own who I am and what I bring to the table, but use that in a way that gave me credibility in what I was inviting people to invest in. And many of you that do know my story, I started out in my career investing in emerging markets, in specifically Latin America, before NAFTA, was even a thing. And what I found is investors, many of us that are risk takers, and entrepreneurs, we look at our risks and we look at the upside potential. And no matter who is presenting it, they have the ability to really look at, an investment opportunity and assess it for themselves. If you present it in a way that obviously is in their language, of, again, risk and reward. And basically that's how I was able to really feel that I overcame so many of the barriers. Now, while there were still many barriers, throughout my career that I have faced, I've always tried to not necessarily ignore them, but, figure out how to solve them in a way that, again, gave me an advantage, at least in my mind, and it worked. Not all the time, but many times, enough times to win more than I lost. So thank God it's been my approach.
No, and that's excellent. And I do want to also introduce one of our other speakers, Sandra Dorsey, who is the founder and CEO of Konzortia Capital. And I want to get, not only just your take, Sandra, but also Walter, your take on what Nellie is sharing with the group as far as leveraging what may be seen as a disadvantage to an advantage in just both of your experiences, not only just on the commercial real estate from your background, Walter, but also Sandra from your aspect from investment banking and working within in the space with investors and private equity. How does that really translate on both sides from someone that's looking for the resources and someone that is looking to allocate funds for projects?
That said, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and to participate in this forum. Of course, I'm passionate about the world of finance and investment. I'm someone who leaped blindly into this world. I did not have a background in finance. I actually came from a more public health background. When I moved to Miami, I realized that public health, if you weren't a doctor or a nurse, it was going to be a challenge. So I decided to leap into something unknown, and I started in banking. As a as a woman of color and someone who also wasn't born and raised in this country, I can tell you that I never had in my mind what I couldn't do. I focused on what I wanted to accomplish. That's always been because I came from that type of household. I came from a household that was extremely, how can I say, goal oriented. My parents taught me well, and also I grew up in a religious household. So I I was fortunate to have someone early in my career who asked me what I didn't know so that he could fill in the blank for me. So he was believed in me, and that's how I got to become one of the top producers at Bank of America. But when I founded my firm, I was also determined not to let anyone tell me what I couldn't do. So investment banking has been a progression for me. I eventually got my MBA. And in the world of investment banking is no different than any small, let's see, loan. I started doing deals at 30,000 and I've gone up to 300 million, and it keeps changing. I've seen billions in my pipeline at times. As far as investor capital, it's also everything in life, I believe, is a selling job. You have to sell yourself before you can actually sell the client. If you're an intermediary like myself, you actually have to build relationships. And that means have the confidence where you can go and present yourself first and then the product. You have to build trust. You have to be able to explain to the potential investor why they should believe in this deal that you're presenting. If you're not a direct investor in the deal and you have no skin in the game, that's a hard sell. Sometimes I'm an investor, sometimes I'm not. But I find that when I am actually participating in the deal, it's an easier process than when I'm just a third party, bringing this information to someone who can add their capital to it without me continuing in the process. What I do speak to them about, what I offer them is I continue to remain a consultant throughout the process to make sure that what I say from the start is going to be when they're ready to exit. That remains consistent. As someone who is passionate about the world of finance and just access to capital for all size firm. I mean, I deal with startups as well as established companies. I could tell you that if the potential investor finds that there is a gap between the story you're telling and what they observed, then it's not going to happen. So you have to really be clear on what it is, the why you're doing it, first of all, and what it is that you're doing. Because even though as an investment banker, I present it on your behalf, there's no one to tell the story like you. And of course, I'm sure, as Mr. Gomez can testify, knowing your product, even if you hire consultants like myself to help you get the capital raise, done, it is so essential that you understand the why. I know there are some founders, and that's good too. Their only goal is to build it and sell it, but there's no passion behind it. The investors will see that. So be clear as to why you're doing it and what you are doing. And going back to the topic of being, because we're talking about diversity, as a woman of color, people bring me information based on their experience. I usually say, well, that's their experience. I differentiate myself by trying not to absorb other people's stories. And I'm not saying some of these issues don't exist, but I don't feel like they serve me in any way. My mentors have been all male. I've not had a female mentor. Most of my the majority, I would say all of my mentors have been someone who didn't check the same racial box as I did. So I don't limit myself because of that. I just think of what I feel passionate about and I focus on that. And at the end of the day, I can only blame, if I didn't accomplish what I set out to do, I can only blame me. See, when I start getting into the story as to what society expects or what society has scripted for me, that's when I'm setting myself up for failure. There is no room for that conversation in my head. I try to program myself with the can-do attitude and delete all the can't-dos that people have inputted in me or have even accepted along the years. So that's all for now while I navigate my technical issues. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you so much for that. And Walter, just on that, when it comes to various projects that you've worked on, I mean, you've been able to create such a unique platform that helps connect not only just the investors, but also the individuals that are looking for access to the private markets. How can platforms like Alpha Hub and technology more broadly drive greater transparency, equity, and access to private markets?
Thank you, Nico. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. Well, this is a topic that is pretty related to my experience. Let me start off with that. I had worked in private equity. I had worked in real estate development. I created my first company before the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, which led to a crash of my company. And then I created a second one, which was very successful. The trouble that I run into every time was being able to find investors to be able to connect with capital. And it doesn't make it any easier. The fact that I am from Latin America, that creates a big challenge for us. And seeing all my experience raising capital when I worked in private equity, then I got to see blockchain, and then AI came in, and putting all the pieces together is how I decided to tackle this problem and find a good solution for it. As you guys know, this is a big challenge that we are facing. This is a big problem, and it cannot be solved with a single solution. So that's why we decided to create Alpha Hub. Alpha Hub is going to be a platform that is right now under development. And by the way, the MVP is coming out in about 3 weeks. Everybody is invited to sign up, and we'll get you free access. This is a platform that is going to take you from deal sourcing, matchmaking, the due diligence process, the execution of the investment, the post-investment portfolio management. It's going to allow you to turn those securities into digital form using a distributed ledger that we have built. And that is going to create the foundation for another problem that we're fixing. And this is the liquidity. How are we going to tackle liquidity? That's through a secondary market that we're going to be building. What's the problem with secondary markets? That there's no liquidity. So you can have these great, very fancy, beautiful platforms, and it's nothing but a listing. And that is about to change. With the use of blockchains, with the use of AI, we are going to be creating a liquid environment where investors can go in and transactions can be settled and clear, if not in real time, pretty close to real time. We call this the Alpha Hub Suite. There is a third component to it, and this comes as a need. We have the primary transactions taken care of with Alpha Hub. We'll have the secondary trading with the secondary market, with Alpha Market, and then we'll have Alpha Terminal. What Alpha Terminal is going to do is going to allow key large blocks of trades being executed by institutional investors and other key players. We are going to be creating some bridges between the traditional private equity deals, the traditional secondary transactions, and bringing in crypto investors that could facilitate the liquidity that we need in those transactions. So in a nutshell, that's what we're building. As you guys know, Rome was not built overnight, and so it's not going to be Alpha Hub, but we're working at it. We have a great team, and we will be excited to welcome you to the platform.
And that's an amazing bridge that you've created within Alpha Hub. And I want to bring in Christian and Nelly to the conversation, just with having experience in accessing private capital and what that deal flow looks like from the real estate side, especially with the commercial real estate. And Nelly, I point this question to you. What's that process look like for you, and what are some of the barriers that you faced in just having the access to private capital and trying to get a project completed that you're really gung-ho about, but you're running into a bit of roadblocks. What's that experience been like for you?
I've been at it so long. I started investing in multifamily back in 1994, and it all started with friends and family, in terms of our original investments. We started buying multifamily in the 90s, buying properties in distressed areas that were kind of on the verge of, gentrification in 1994, that we were coming out of a recession. And, being in the investment markets, I was investing in REITs, so I kind of had a feeling that, it was time to buy some bricks and mortar. And that's what we did. So for us, I think for anybody that's looking to start out, I would say look at, Sandra mentioned, the fact having skin in the game. For me, it's always been that way where, when I'm investing in something and if I'm feeling that strongly about it, I personally don't feel good about it unless I have money in the project myself. So that definitely gives investors a tremendous amount of confidence. And that's one of the first questions people ask, actually, how much are you putting in? And I like to be able to answer that question with a strong vote of confidence, knowing that, the percentage and the amount of money I'm putting in is serious, right? It's not something that's, just kind of like throwing a little crumb into it, but something that's going to be substantial. And, our interests are absolutely going to be aligned, and I talked a little bit about, how people, invest, when you're talking to a real investor, I've learned and I've believed that, it really comes down to, doing your homework and putting together a pitch deck that's bulletproof, and I think because we are diverse, right, I've always put that, expectation on myself that, I can't be average, I've got to be better than average because I'm going to be held to a higher standard. And by doing that, I not only, I'm able to show a bulletproof presentation, but, throughout the years, my performance today, thank God, speaks for itself.
That's amazing. And especially being in the city of Chicago, real estate in itself is not as easy to come by as most other marketplaces, especially when you talk about a metropolized city like that in New York. Being able to pull together the type of resources that are needed to either purchase buildings or purchase multifamily units does come at a bit of a cost. And I know, Mr. Waske, you've worked a lot in the wealth management sector with a lot of affluent individuals that are looking to do these very types of projects. What are some experiences that you've come across that the audience could take part from as far as what they can do to potentially access that capital or position themselves to where they can access capital?
Well, I'm listening to Nelly, Sandra, and even Walter, kind of share their experiences. What in summary, I believe they were communicating were some of those top 5 challenges, right? That the diverse founders generally kind of run into, whether it's implicit bias, lack of access to social networks. I think that. I would say unfair kind of, standards when it relates to, getting your deal book ready and making sure that, like it's better than everyone else's because you don't have the opportunity to fill. And then taking on the mindset of, I would say, instead of kind of looking at, what you can't do, really kind of double down and figure out what you can bring to the table, right? And that's why really I think Alpha Hub is a great access point, right? Looking at the story of Alpha Hub, being able to, kind of match, funders with projects is a great solution that is out there, and holding the hand of the project manager or the founder, so to speak, in terms of how to create a deal book and how to get, kind of your paperwork together. And even streamline this process for you so that when you get in front of an investor, right, like you have all the boxes checked. There's so many amazing stories out there about, kind of sourcing, capital. But to Nelly's point, like, whenever I go out to either raise capital or supporting organizations raising capital, or even raising capital for organizations that I supported in the past. I think that it always starts out with being the best version of yourself humanly possible, right? That's out there, and leave nothing to chance, right? Because you have one opportunity to be great, and you should capitalize on it. And so I would kind of say, yeah, there are these top five reasons why diverse funders kind of struggle accessing capital, and all the speakers kind of highlighted that. But I will say, I will encourage everyone on the call to take special note of Alpha Hub, and I would say sign onto the platform, because I think that it could create an amazing pathway with all the capabilities Walter highlighted, to kind of connect founders with funding, right? And then we kind of have an explosion of SME businesses in so many economies, local and even on the global scale.
That's excellent. And Walter, I do want to ask, even in coming in with the idea of Alpha Hub and your experience in commercial real estate and development, what has been a few of the challenges that you faced and that really helped spark the idea of Alpha Hub, and how others could take away some of the best practices that you've been able to apply to yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that. I've been on both sides of the table when it comes to investing, my early stages in private equity. When we were going through due diligence processes, those could take months. And then at the end, we found out that that was not a deal that it was going to come true. So this is one of the things that Alpha Hub is going to fix. As you know, those processes can be something that takes a few days, or it can take several months. It can be a very complex deal. It can be a VC, simple, straightforward transaction. But going through the due diligence, looking at all the different financial aspects to it, the compliance aspect to it, the legalities, and everything that has to do with licensing and everything else is a very lengthy process. And for you as an allocator, you do not always count with a bunch of resources. If you look, for example, at family offices, they might be an operation that has 2 or 3 people in it, and they just don't have the time in the day. They just don't have the human capital to be able to go through the very extensive due diligence processes. They might miss on some opportunities that will be a perfect fit for them. So that's exactly one of the problems we're fixing. By simplifying the due diligence process, it doesn't mean that we are going to be underwriting the deals. It means that we'll give you direction on what it is that you need to focus on. And if you have a team that team needs to focus on, and you'll have a pretty good idea of what the due diligence looks like. So that way you can spend the time on those deals. Now, on the other side of the table, when it comes to raising funds, it's one of those situations where you have to go into hundreds and hundreds of meetings. And then at the end, in many of the occasions, you discover that the investor is not investing in your industry, not investing in your stage, is not a match at all. And those things will be eliminated through Alpha Hub. The matchmaking process is going to eliminate that. And then there's going to be a human component, which we believe is crucial for every type of transactions in the private capital markets industry. The ability to be able to connect with an individual is going to lead a deal forward, or is going to make a break. And we are going to be building one of the modules, which we feel is very interesting. It's going to be called the Hub. And the way I like to describe it is LinkedIn without the nonsense that LinkedIn has these days, that every day seems like it's turning more like into a Facebook or a TikTok. We are building a section of the platform that is going to be focused on business, focused on private capital markets transactions, focused on both sides of the table, validating the counterparty and how they can work together. If you look at mergers and acquisitions, that is a pretty important component of a transaction. And this is something that can be taken out of the way, taken out of the equation in the early stages, and you can focus on the transactional aspects of it. You can focus on getting the deal completed, and that's just going to make the entire environment more efficient for everyone.
No, and that's fantastic, because a lot of individuals, just like Sandra, I'm gonna call on you here to kind of respond, and as we dovetail off to our next section of the webinar. But based on what Walter is sharing as far as simplifying that process and making sure that the deal flow is streamlined, we live in a day and age where AI and technology is really helping with taking out the back office paperwork that bogs down a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, and startups. So just being a part of that space directly with your company. What does that look like for at least individuals that are starting up and getting their workflows together to get the capital that they need to get their companies up and running?
Well, the deal flow. So I have a standing operating procedure in my company that shows from A to Z where you are from the beginning stage, whether it is just a phone call to inquire about, the services we provide, all the way to the end, to the capital raise, where, I usually remove myself from the end because basically by then the investor and the company leader has already, formed a relationship and no longer need me unless I'm still needed, as I mentioned earlier in my statement. But as far as I have been using, before AI came into the mainstream on the back end, I always used Salesforce. Salesforce was definitely very helpful in me helping to create the process deal flow, because some of the functions that they have are, timing. It reminds you when to follow up. It reminds you when something had, like a task has expired. Now they have specialized system for private equity, for venture capital, where it's targeting those type of deals where I felt the lack that I experienced in Salesforce wasn't deal specific or industry specific enough for me. So I still am extremely engaged in the process as far as what at what stage. I'm old school. I've been at this 20 years. When we were handwriting everything, I had a log book of my deals, and of course there's the human resource side of things. I still employ many people that they're either contracted or I pay them within the firm to make sure a smooth process for myself and also so there are three stakeholders: myself, the investor, and the project owner or the startup founder. So AI has a place for, in the conversation, but I don't think it is the only tool to be used. I don't believe that you can completely remove the human element from the process. I am someone who makes sure that it's smooth from beginning to end. And I am not confident enough about AI to say that I can fully rely on what it offers. So to your point, I can just say, yes, AI is very helpful, but I guess I am, I'm too traditional to remove myself completely from the process.
Yeah, and I can understand that, because even with technology nowadays, even with Microsoft Teams, we tend to have hiccups, but it definitely helps make the process streamlined and a lot easier. When it comes down to the back office paperwork or the clerical errors that could come around. So, we definitely want to be able to leverage the technology of today to help us move to the future for tomorrow. And so, I want to come back to Christian about the discussion that you were having on the Alpha Hub being able to help eliminate a lot of those workflows. Can you kind of expand on how that can help some of the diverse founders kind of give more access to capital to wrap us
Yes.
up?
Yeah, I to expand on that, I think I'll piggyback on what Ms. Dorsey was sharing. A lot of business owners are involved in the process, and they know a lot about the project that they're working on. But in terms of having access to creating deal books and knowing how to Nelly's point, make presentations, and even to Nelly's point as well, develop funding sources. I think that from what I understand about Alpha Hub and what Walter was sharing, it guides the founder through the process of creating a deal book, and then matches that founder with investors tailored to that particular industry, so to speak, and then even further expands on an introduction. So when you do get in front of an investor like myself, you pretty much have your deal book kind of solidified, and you've moved away from the passion speak right into the technical aspect of the business. I mean, yeah, everybody has a brilliant idea to start. Many people have brilliant ideas to start companies. They're very passionate about the what. In some cases, they understand the why behind it. But transitioning that to have pretty much adequate financials behind it, and projections for business growth, and more importantly, how those funds are going to be used. Nelly brought up a good point earlier while she was kind of talking about sourcing capital from a family of friends, from a group of friends and family, right? But also kind of putting skin in the game. And I think it's difficult for an investor to kind of look at a project where founder has zero skin in the game, right? And so my hope is that Alpha Hub would be able to, I would say, build that bridge, right? So that the founder basically can have a well-packaged deal book put together, and so that when they meet the investor, there are less chances for the investor to look at the deal and walk away, versus look at the deal and say, this is something that I want to be a part of. And I think that's why Alpha Hub is really exciting to me. In the introduction of AI, right, it takes away a lot of the minutia that can kind of come with it. We were looking at doing a capital raise, a $20 million capital raise going into fourth quarter of last year. And one of the interesting things was the volume of paperwork that as a founder that you need to kind of be on top of. And so looking at Alpha Hub's platform, I'm like, wow, we could have saved hundreds of man hours, right? Reviewing paperwork if we had an AI model that was trained to design the deal book in a way that an investor in our industry wanted to take a look at. And so, I really, really am excited about the introduction of AI into a lot of these administrative processes, because it truly cuts down on a lot of expense on the human capital side, but can help refine almost to 100 percentile the accuracy in deal book presentation that an investor would be interested in looking at.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. And as we wrap up our conversation here today, I do want to thank our incredible panelists, Nelly, Christian, and also Sandra, for sharing such valuable insights and perspective today. But before we move on to the Q&A, I would like to turn it over to the founder and CEO of Alpha Hub, Walter Gomez, to share a few words.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you to all of our panelists and everyone that has joined this webinar. As I used to tell my wife, there was always a good fit somewhere out there that will be investing in us until we found it. The trouble is that it took a lot of time, and we can simplify that process. That is one of many problems that we're fixing. So I want to leave you with the final thought. This is not just another platform. This is a platform that is going to redesign how transactions are happening in the private capital markets industry. And we would love for you to be part of our platform. Thank you very much.
Excellent, and thank you so much, Walter. I want to see Trevor. We want to open it up for Q&A. So Trevor, can you see if we have any questions that that the panelists can answer? If we have any.
Absolutely. Let me take a look. It does not look like we have any at present to directly address. So we do have some additional time for any further discussion if we need to. And if there are any questions that are any last minute from anyone in the audience, I would just invite you as a final last call to go ahead and drop those on our Q&A so we can make sure we get those addressed before we hop off for the day.
Can I just say something? I think that
Sure.
what you're doing, Walter, is amazing. I think I'm looking forward to, doing some more research and learning more about it. And I think the most important thing for me is when, I'm looking for funders is to make sure that there's alignment, in terms of understanding the risks, and the rewards. Because I think where sometimes we make mistakes is when we're looking for investors is to not making sure that they understand the ups and downs of investing, right? And for me, one of the things that was so important was always to start out and inviting investors, saying, hey, we can lose it all. It's like, just so and then before I built my case, in terms of, why it's a good investment, I'll give you an example. Last year, and naturally, I might have told you about this project we were investing in. We were buying a building, 50-unit multifamily apartment building in Chicago. And if you go back in the news, last year and even this year, all you hear about, and Christian, this, all you hear about is Chicago is the crime, the property taxes, the population, depopulation, businesses being taxed, I mean, it's like the negative news is out there. And I've always been a contrarian, my whole life. And I'm like, look, we talking to my investors saying, we all know, the bad news. What I'd like to invite you to consider is some of the good news, because of all the reasons that they state, in terms of why they are not interested in investing in Chicago, are actually reasons why we should invest in Chicago. In Chicago, we have no new developments going on of substance, right? We have about a 200,000 unit shortage of apartments that we need in our city just to meet the demand that we have. Talk about climate. Look what's happening on all the coasts, in terms of, hurricanes and natural disasters, fires. You can't get insurance, right? And if you look at what's going on with AI, they all need to be near bodies of water, fresh water. So the more I look at it, and the more I was looking at it back a year ago, the other thing too is we're competing with a lot of other types of investment options. You're competing with the stock market, right? And I'm like, okay, we need to look at some bricks and mortar to make sure that we have real estate, gold, silver, hard assets in our portfolio. And nobody was really thinking about that last year. So luckily, we were able to buy that 50-unit apartment building. Actually, today I just got an article in Real Deal Chicago that highlighted the building that we purchased. And it was in comparison to a property that right next door just got sold. Because we were buying really at the trough of what I felt was the market here in Chicago, where, basically all bets were off. We were able to get brand new units for $321 a unit. To build in Chicago, it's about $500,000 to $700,000 per unit. Getting a brand new property per unit cost at $321 was an amazing opportunity. And the buildings right next door of similar size, two of them, just got sold for $421 per unit. So I just feel like, as long as we keep building up a track record that shows over and over and over again how we're able to take advantage of, situations where the rest of the world is looking at one thing, but you see the silver lining, and the upside. And again, AI is not going to displace real estate. We always are going to need a place to live. So for me, it was probably one of the most safest investments you could make because it's not going anywhere. So I think that the more we can talk about, our track records and how we look at things and explain to an investor, things that maybe they hadn't considered, the more value you're going to bring to the table and the more they're going to be able to trust, what you're recommending and want to participate. And my investors today are actually, many of them are saying, don't forget to call me on the next deal. And that's what you want, but, you can never have a book big enough, Walter. So I'm eager to find out more about what you've got going on, because I'm sure there's a lot of investors out there that are looking for us too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Nellie. And at Alpha Hub, we believe access to capital should never depend on who you know, but rather on what you build and how you execute. If you haven't already, we invite you to join our early beta and also our executive circle at www.alpha-hub.ai and be a part of the movement to make private capital smarter, faster, and more inclusive. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar event. On behalf of the Alpha Hub team and our panelists, thank you and have a great afternoon.
That will end our webinar for today. I thank you all for your attendance as well.